Chapter 13, Monster Island Buddies. Shinji woke with a start. He bolted upright, a hand covering where his wound should have been. He felt around, making sure that it was fully healed. He was still in his armor, strangely enough, although his helmet had been removed. It was then that he realized that he was no longer in Misato's apartment. Instead of the familiar floor, there was white sand. He ran a hand through it, almost as if to verify that it was real. Looking upwards, he saw there was nothing over his head but a blue sky occasionally marked with clouds. A gentle breeze caressed his face, and he could hear the sound of waves lapping against the shore nearby. For the first time in quite a while, he felt tranquil. "Ah, good, you're awake," Zone Fighter said in his head. "It's quite boring when I'm trapped in your head with no one to talk to." "Where are we?" Shinji asked. "I don't know," Zone Fighter replied. "Remember, I can only see what you see. You must have wound up here while you were unconscious." Shinji heard footsteps behind him, muted somewhat by the sand underfoot. He turned around to find Asuka standing before him. She was clad in a yellow sundress and devoid of any footwear, although his focus was more drawn to the look on her face. Several emotions were fighting for control there. Anger. Relief. Sadness. Remorse. "You're awake," she said rather tersely. Shinji realized that he had yet to change back into his civilian clothes. "Asuka, I already know," Asuka replied. Shinji gulped. There was only one meaning for that statement. She sighed softly before continuing. "Here," she said, holding his stat player up for him to see. Shinji took the stat player, turning it over in his hands. Asuka turned about and walked away, her hair swaying in the breeze. It was surreal, seeing her like that. There was no typical name-calling or angry remarks. The fiery redhead had turned as cold as ice. After a moment's hesitation, he decided to follow after her, making sure to keep his distance. A gut feeling told him it would be a rather unintelligent idea to be too close to her at the moment. He also switched back to civilian clothes in a flash of light, his energy having recharged overnight. After a few minutes of walking they reached the others. Misato sat right at the shore, the waves gently lapping at her toes. Gordon and Miki were holding a conversation of sorts nearby, while Jet Jaguar appeared to be trying to teach Junior Sign Language. Pin was swimming rather close to Godzilla. Shinji's eyes widened. "Godzilla?" he thought to himself. He blinked a few times in order to verify that he was still in reality. Indeed, Godzilla was resting rather close to the shore, with Kensuke and Dr. Otonashi standing on his shoulder. A couple of seagulls were perched on his dorsal spines, and the nuclear leviathan eyed him with a look of half-interest. "Asuka," Shinji began with some trepidation, "what on earth did I miss while I was unconscious?" The pilot didn't answer, instead she hurried her pace and soon left him behind. Shinji decided not to pursue out of a sense of self-preservation. Instead, he decided to walk over to Gordon and Miki, who appeared to be in the latter stages of their discussion. The two took notice of him and smiled. "How was your nap, Shinji?" Gordon asked. "I'm so confused," the boy replied. Gordon's face fell a bit. "We have a lot to talk about," he said. He gestured to a vehicle resting on the sand nearby. "Head inside, you'll want to sit down for this." Mothra hovered over the trees, flapping her wings in an almost casual manner. The force of each flap threatened to bowl Kaji over, even if he was a good half-mile away. The Shobijin seemed completely unaffected, however, and were continuing to sing another song of theirs in what sounded like Malayalam. They were perched on a nearby tree stump, having summoned Kaji over for some untold reason. Kaji recalled a distinct lack of vegetation when he had first visited the island. The great moth was glowing now, illuminating the surrounding area in a soft orange light. Glowing scales were falling from the goddess, swirling through the air in a beautiful pattern. The light intensified, and Kaji had to cover his eyes to keep from going blind. The Shobaijin were singing at full volume now, and Kaji could distinctly hear it, even over the howling winds created by Mothra's wings. The light finally faded, and Kaji uncovered his eyes. Mothra was gone, a large multicolored egg in her place. The Shobaijin had stopped singing and now turned to Kaji. The former triple agent couldn't help but feel a little unsettled by their complete unison. Mothra has begun her reincarnation, they said. The goddess is at her weakest at this state, she cannot protect us from those who mean us harm. So you want me to be your bodyguard while she reincarnates? Kaji replied. The twins nodded. Kaji rubbed the back of his head, wondering what to do next. Got anything for me to carry you in? He asked. Misato continued to stare out into the sea, having done so for more than an hour. Never once did she loosen the grip on her cross. Occasionally she would dart her eyes over at the resting form of Godzilla, who Kensuke had taken an immense interest in. It was the only movement she allowed for now. There was the sound of footsteps muffled by sand, and then Asuka sat down by her side. The red-headed pilot took a sitting position very similar to the purple-haired woman and sighed. I still can't believe it, Asuka said. All of those people were killed by a bunch of assholes who wanted to become gods. The commander's in on it, and they've pretty much got the world in their pockets. Misato was silent for a moment, then she spoke. Asuka, did I ever tell you about my father? She asked softly. No, Asuka replied, somewhat uneasy. Was he killed in Second Impact? He was at the epicenter of Second Impact, Asuka, Misato replied. My father paid more attention to his work than he did to me, but he nonetheless brought me along to Antarctica with him to do some research. I had no idea what he was studying at the time, but now I know. She sighed before continuing. He was studying atom. I never really thought that my father cared for me, but he gave up his life to save me by putting me in an emergency shelter just in time. I survived, but now I have a scar to show for it, she said. Why are you telling me this? Asuka asked. You've never bared yourself to me like this before. I dedicated my life to fighting the angels in order to avenge my father and everyone else killed in Second Impact, replied Misato. And now, I know that all of that death and suffering was all because of men who lusted after things they never should have. I don't know what to do now, Asuka. We should make the bastards pay. Asuka replied angrily. We can't just let them get away with this. What can we do? Misato asked. If what they're saying is true, these guys pretty much control the world and are completely anonymous. How could we ever hope to oppose them? We have those alternate universe guys on our side, Asuka replied. There's also Godzilla and those other monsters. Don't forget Shinji, Misato added. Asuka's face hardened. I don't want to talk about him. Why? Because he took your kills? Misato asked. He lied to me. All this time, I thought he was just a timid baka, and it turns out that he was going out and fighting the angels as some alien superhero. Asuka replied. He made me feel useless. He also saved your life countless times, Asuka, Misato replied. He almost died saving you, or were you too caught up in your own issues to notice that? Asuka fell quiet, thinking. Misato rose from the sand, brushing herself off. You are right about Seal, though. We should make those bastards pay, she added with a grin. She extended a hand. Wanna do it together, or am I going to have to do the work all by myself? Asuka took the hand and rose as well. Together the two headed over to Gordon and Miki, who were in the process of telling Shinji something. It was noontime now, and everyone was present, save for the monsters. Godzilla had risen from the sea and taken Junior with him to go guard Mothra's egg. Anguirus and Rodin were on the other side of the island, exploring their temporary home that was both similar and different from their own one. The group was seated in or around the Super X, preparing to discuss their plan to combat Seal and their cronies. Shinji sat farthest from the group, thinking quietly to himself. He was still reeling from what he had been told about Second Impact, and Zone Fighter had gone quiet for some time now. Kaji was the first one to speak. SEAL has multiple locations hidden around the world, usually in remote areas rendered uninhabited by Second Impact. The operations going on there are largely automated, so there aren't that many people actually aware of what's going on. What are they doing there? Misato asked. It appears that they mass-producing Evangelions, Kaji replied. I thought they were already mass-producing Evangelions, Asuka replied. Unit 02 is the first in the production model. Kaji shook his head. That was a cover-up to divert resources. Unit 03 and Unit 04 are experimental, just like the ones before it. The ones that SEAL are building are completely identical to one another, and apparently won't need pilots when they are completed. How would that even work? Misato asked. Kaji shrugged. I don't know all the details. I don't even know how many they're making. That isn't a lot to go on, Gordon replied. Do you know where these facilities are? Only some, and even then it's only the general area, replied Kaji. You know, can't Miki use her psychic abilities or something in order to find out? Miki shook her head. I need to know who and where the person is. Junior and Godzilla are the only exceptions because of my link. Okay then. Any other suggestions as to how we can find these Evangelions? Kaji asked. Maybe Godzilla could sniff them out, Misato suggested. He seems to know whenever an angel's attacking. That will not work, the Shobaijin replied. Godzilla and his fellow rulers of Earth can only detect active threats, the goddess included. They cannot be active at this moment, otherwise Godzilla would have found them already and destroyed them. Shit, Kaji muttered, running a hand through his hair. So much for the easy way of finding them. Not necessarily, Jet interjected. I have a possible solution, albeit a rather dangerous one. Which is? Misato asked. We break into Nerve headquarters, Jet replied. Commander Ikari's office. What has Section 2 found? Gendo inquired, his hands back into their usual position. Not much, Fuatsuki replied. They have searched the entire apartment from top to bottom. It appears that Major Katsuragi and the second child were kept completely unaware of the third secret identity. Nothing else? Asked Gendo. Fuatsuki produced a thin journal from his pocket. Only this. Gendo took the journal and opened it, rapidly flipping through its pages. It consisted of illustrations of monstrous creatures, occasionally followed by descriptions of them. Of particular interest to him were illustrations of LS-001 and that red dinosaur creature that had attacked the Pacific Fleet at Tokyo Harbor. It appears that the third child knows more than he let on, he commented. Have we located him or the others yet? Fuatsuki shook his head. They've completely disappeared. We've checked the airports and harbors across the nation. We have no idea where they could be at the moment. The only possible lead we may have is a satellite blackout over the Pacific Ocean. Gendo's eyebrows perked at the mention of the Pacific. Do you recall that island that LS-001 made a beeline to after the battle with the third angel? Fuatsuki nodded. Chichijima. Have the UN focus their searches there? I have a suspicion as to where our missing persons may be, Gendo ordered. Fuatsuki nodded. Yes, Commander. Mount Asama. Deep within the volcano, withstanding the crushing pressure and heat of thousands of tons of magma, was an embryo. At first glance, one might have mistaken it for a human embryo. The resemblance was most striking. However, the resemblance was nothing more than a deception. This embryo was that of the eighth angel, Sandalphon. And already it was beginning to stir.